Hello, bookworms. Welcome to Best Book Ever, the podcast where we talk about your favorite books. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and my guest today is Elizabeth Gowing. Elizabeth is the author of 5 books and the co-founder of the Ideas Partnership, an NGO which empowers and supports people in need in Kosovo in the fields of education, health and social welfare, cultural heritage, and protection of the environment. In 2016, the President of Kosovo awarded Elizabeth the Mother Teresa Medal for her humanitarian work. In 2017, she was named by British Prime Minister Theresa May as a point of light for volunteering around the world. She runs training for NGOs and others on telling the story of making positive change in the world. She's a frequent contributor to Radio 4 and a speaker to groups in the UK. And lucky for all of us, in addition to all that, she's also a voracious reader. Bookworms, my chat with Elizabeth was so inspiring. I am thrilled that she joined me today to talk about why Playing Big by Tara Mohr is the best book ever. Bookworms, this is normally the part of the show when I ask you to support the podcast over on Patreon. My patrons get extra interview clips every week in addition to all sorts of other bookish goodies. My exclusive question for Elizabeth was rewarded with an especially moving conversation about the role of physical books in our lives. I enjoyed it so much, I knew I had to share it with all of you. Stay tuned after the interview for a special sneak peek into the patron-only content. Now, back to the show. Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome to the Best Book Ever podcast.
Hi, it's very nice to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me from so far away.
Nowhere's far away on Zoom.
Excellent point. I think, Elizabeth, you have one of the most fascinating lives I have ever heard about. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you do for a living and where you live and what your life is like.
Yeah, it is a bit complicated. It's actually just got a little bit easier just in the last month because I was splitting my life between 3 countries and now I'm splitting my life between 2 countries. So that's good. So I used to say that I had the man that I love in one country, the work that I love in another country, and the work that I get paid for in a third country. But the great thing is that now the man that I love and the work that I love are in the same country. So that's a bit easier. But the countries in question are, were Albania, which is where the man that I love was working. And Kosovo is the country that I love and the work that I love. And then the work that I get paid for is more often in the UK, which is where I'm from originally. So for the last 7 years, we've been splitting our time. Like in an average month, I was spending probably a week in the UK. And then of the remaining 3 weeks, I'd be spending about 2 of them in Albania and 1 of them in Kosovo, something like that. And that was pretty much every month going back and forth. And in fact, I was doing more like a weekly commute between Albania and Kosovo, doing 4 days in one place, 3 days in the other. Which is perhaps not quite as drastic as it sounds, because Albania and Kosovo are, they're adjoining countries, but it's still it was a kind of 5-hour door-to-door journey from my house in Albania, in the capital Tirana, to my house in Kosovo. But actually that links with my reading, because it was on those bus journeys that I was doing all of my reading. So for those 7 years, I read more than I had since being a teenager, because I had audiobooks on the bus.
So what is your work?
Well, that's not a straightforward answer either. The work that I love, the one that I don't get paid for, is the work of our charity, of our nonprofit, which is called the Ideas Partnership, which I co-founded with my partner Rob and with our friend, and which it works with the poorest communities in Kosovo, who are communities of rubbish pickers mainly, largely working on education projects, but also health initiatives and advocacy projects, supporting the communities to advocate for their own needs. And we're now, I think, Kosovo's 3rd largest volunteer organization. And I'm now the owner of a social business which is associated with that, which is supporting women from those disadvantaged communities into work and supporting them in the business on condition that their kids go to school. So trying to break that cycle of poverty. So that's the work that I don't get paid for at all, but that, where my heart is in Kosovo. And then I'm a writer. I'm the author of 5 books, and I'm also a freelance journalist, and I write for the BBC and for others. And then recently, over the last year, I've been bringing together those 2 bits of my life, the work in the nonprofit sector and the writing, to support other people, to offer training and webinars and consultancy, supporting nonprofits in how to tell their story. So that's, I guess, the main work that I'm paid for.
How did you come across this work, the work that you love? How did you come to found this charity?
Well, probably like actually lots of the best work. I mean, it was really by chance. We'd done a few projects when we first arrived in Kosovo. So we've been based in Kosovo for 14 years now. And in fact, a couple of years ago, the president of Kosovo gave me citizenship by decree. And so I'm now a Kosovan citizen as well as a British citizen. But we'd been in Kosovo for 4 years, and we'd done a few little volunteer projects and a few ourselves, me and my partner, but also working with other people and occasionally getting little donations that we were kind of keeping in an envelope in the bedside table. And then we realized we kind of needed to make this a bit more transparent and accountable and be able to apply for more grants and whatever. So we set up a nonprofit, but we still didn't have any particular big cause. We'd done some things on education because my background is as a teacher, and we'd also worked on the environment and working on cultural heritage. And then just by chance, I was walking through this very poor neighborhood in one of the suburbs of the capital, when this woman came rushing out of her house and said, "You've got to help me, and you've got to help my son." And her 3-year-old son had been very badly burnt. They had a very small home, just one room, and they had 5 kids who were all playing around the stove. And the 3-year-old had this pan of boiling water pulled down and got really terribly burnt. And so I kind of got involved in that family's story and in helping them in very small ways, and then got to learn a bit more about the reality of their lives as rubbish pickers and recyclers, and the fact that their kids weren't in school and some of the reasons for that. And so slowly, that's how the work really started. But it didn't, I didn't aim for us to be the 3rd largest volunteer organization or to be working on all these projects. It was just helping that one child to start with, and then it kind of grew.
What does rubbish picker mean in Kosovo? Is it picked to be resold, or is it picked just for sustenance?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Kind of for three things really. So there's finding the things that can be recycled, because there's actually no formal recycling in Kosovo. So, these people are actually offering a service, to the planet and to the municipality in a way, even though that's not how it's perceived. But having now gone out with some of those pickers and seen the work they do both in the streets and going through the big skips that are behind apartment blocks, for example, I've understood that actually they really are offering a public service as well as earning money for themselves. So yeah, that's one of the things that they are doing, is collecting particularly plastic bottles and metal that can be recycled. But then they are also often looking for food for themselves. And so they're coming home with the moldy half loaf of bread that someone's thrown away or whatever they found. And then they're also looking for things that can be resold. So there's usually a little market in those communities where the things that have been salvaged from the trash can be resold. So it's a mixture. And there are slight hierarchies within, the families, I guess, like every society. So, some would never eat what they find in the trash, but they collect to recycle, and others, would only resell and not deal with stuff that's recycling. So, yeah, there are hierarchies and snobberies everywhere.
A few weeks ago, you were a guest on Joanna Penn's Books and Travel podcast, and you said a sentence that has stuck with me that I want to ask you about. You said that Kosovo's a country which responds well to enthusiasm and spontaneity. Can you tell me what that means?
Yeah, well, actually, I've been thinking a lot about it in the pandemic, because I actually think that during this pandemic, all of us, even British people have become more spontaneous and have become, aware that actually it's it's impossible to plan, and that we can have dreams that the future is under our control, but so many things, not just pandemics of course, but little things, big things can change and derail our plans. And so I think that's the most profound lesson I've learned in these 14 years. I still am to a certain extent, but I used to be, to an extreme extent, a real forward planner, and a very, that's where a lot of my sense of self and sense of security and sense of control came from. It was in knowing, what I was going to be doing in 2 months' time on a Tuesday afternoon. And, that's illusory, in fact. There's no way that's really attainable. And so, yeah, I think people in the Balkans have, perhaps because of some of the tragedies that their lives have gone through, whether that's war and poverty and governments that aren't accountable, that people don't feel that they've got such a direct line to making decisions about their future, which can be frustrating, and it can hold development back for individuals and for a society. But it also means that, people are willing to just drop everything because, someone's arrived in town, or people, respond to what the weather's doing and make the most of it, not to what they scheduled a month ago for what they thought the weather would be like today. And so, yeah, I think it's a happier, perhaps more mindful, perhaps that's the way to put it now, way to live. And certainly that's something that's shifted for me over these years of living here.
It certainly would make you more adaptable, and especially in times like these, where those of us who are, and I am a planner too, mm-hmm. for years in advance planner, and times like these sort of send me into an existential crisis.
And do you think you've learned something from it?
I think I'm in the process of learning, which is the most painful part. But hopefully I will come out of it with that, as you described, enthusiasm and spontaneity.
Or just come to the Balkans and then you can learn it that way.
Well, I will tell you, getting ready to talk to you, I went on a deep dive of pictures of Kosovo, and it will not shock you that I, like most Americans, have an absolutely shocking lack of knowledge about that area in general, and most of geography, because that's just kind of how we're educated here. But I learned a lot, and I must say, what a beautiful country. Why is it not touristed more?
Oh, well, I'm so glad you think that, because I think it's a beautiful country too. And I mean, of course, the two parts of that sentence might be connected. It might be a beautiful country because it's not touristed.
Maybe we should cut this part out of the podcast.
No, don't cut it. Don't cut it. No, I mean, Kosovo needs a lot more people to come. It probably doesn't need, quite the levels that go to Albania or Croatia. It hasn't got a coast. So I think that, is one of the reasons that people don't come. But the other reason is what you just said, that people have got such an impression of it as, their only knowledge of it is as a source of war or refugees, and that's not where most people choose to spend their vacations. But it has got such, as well as natural beauty and fascinating history, both long history and also the recent history. The thing I think that strikes everybody, and this could be at risk from tourism, is its really sincere and profound tradition of hospitality. So there is such, you're given such a sense of being welcome and being special and being appreciated if you come here as a foreigner. And the traditions in Kosovo are that the saying is that your home belongs to God and the guest. So, as a guest, you're second only to God, and people really treat you like that. Especially, I have to say, if you're American or British, who are seen as such allies of the Albanians of Kosovo during the 1999 war. And so people, always respond to that and always mention that when they talk about time traveling in Kosovo.
So tell me about the role of reading in your life. You said you read a lot when you were commuting. So how is reading going to be a part of your life now that you don't have this long commute anymore?
Well, I know that's something I'm having to deal with. So I'm on Goodreads, and I've been doing that a yearly challenge. You know, they ask you to kind of set a challenge for how many books you want to read in a year. And last year, me and my sister, we both set 52 books, you know, one a week. And I exceeded it. I got 57 books I read last year, thanks to my commuting and my audiobooks. And this year already, I'm way, way down. And my sister is, you know, making jeering noises on Goodreads.
Book shaming.
Exactly. So for that reason alone, I need to sort this out. But the only time I'm listening to audiobooks now, which is how I got so much of it done when I was traveling, is on my exercise bike. So the other option is just to do lots and lots of cycling. So I might be very thin and very well read, or I might be neither of those things. But at least, I mean, I'm perhaps reading a book every 2 weeks now, which is not so terrible. It's just not as good as my sister.
And do you normally read nonfiction?
I mean, I normally, well, I say that I normally have 5 books on the go, which is about right. And the 5 books are normally one nonfiction book, one good fiction book, quote, you know, something that I'm really savoring the language in, one not so good fiction book that's not about the language, that's, you know, plot driven and page turning, one foreign language book, I mean, mainly Albanian. I have been known to read a few French books, but it's for the last few years, it's Albanian I'm really reading, and then one poetry book. So roughly, I'd say that's what my diet is, but I certainly, my preference is for the nonfiction. I tend to get through those quicker, and I've got a longer list to read of nonfiction books than fiction, so yeah.
I love that you divide it like that. And I was just thinking yesterday about my audiobooks habits because I was writing a Patreon article for it. And I started looking at how I divide my books up. And I noticed that I almost exclusively listen to thrillers on audio. And that's because I don't necessarily need to savor. I just want to be into the story. And I listen to audiobooks while I'm working out or while I'm working in the garden, or I'm doing something else. And so I don't want to have to stop, because I have tried to listen to literary fiction on audio, and I don't like that feeling of take off my garden gloves and replay that sentence. And so
also taking notes. I love being able to take notes of the good bits or the, you know, the good phrases or whatever. And yeah, you're right. It's harder to do on audio.
Do you write in your books? Are you a book?
Yes, I do.
Me too. Some people get so angry, and it's how I remember things.
And also I love the fact that it's, you know, I do treat books really like a notebook, really. So, you know, I of course note thoughts or comments or whatever in the margin, but also I'm very happy to use the back of the book as my shopping list or my to-do list. And so a book then becomes a real record of, you know, my life during the time that I was reading it. So, and I like that about it. It just makes it harder to sell them on. I always have to, if I, well, sell them or even gift them, I have to kind of read through and check there's nothing embarrassing on the on my to-do list before I give it to somebody.
So tell me, how did you come across this book that we're discussing today, Playing Big?
Yeah, well, actually, it's not the kind of book that I would normally read, although it's nonfiction. It's I don't know whether Tara Mohr, the author, would mind it being called a self-improvement book, but it's, you know, belongs to that kind of genre. And honestly, I don't think I've probably ever read another book like that. Or maybe I can think of one or two in my life. But I mean, this is not a genre I read a lot of. And I was actually quite resistant to it. I was a bit resistant to the title as well, Playing Big. This idea is sort of, I've got to do something more, you know, is this not enough? And the only reason I read it was because a friend of mine, an American friend of mine in Tirana, had read it and been very moved by it. And she organized a reading group of it for employees, female employees at her workplace. And she bought them all a copy of the book, and they did a kind of study group. So every week they read a chapter and then met to discuss it. And every week she invited a guest to come and speak about their experience of the theme of that chapter. So she got in touch with me and asked if I would be the speaker for the LEAP chapter, which didn't mean anything to me at the time. And so she said, could I come and speak about the leap that I had made in my life? And of course, I then had to read that chapter. So I obediently, in fact, she photocopied it for me. And I was like, I don't need to read the rest of the book because it's not my kind of book. And I read the chapter and I loved it so much that I downloaded the audio and loved that so much that when I read the whole book, that I ended up buying it for various friends, one by one. And in total, I have given it to 14 different friends now. And so I just, when you asked what's your best book ever, I thought, well, I can't say that it's like the most literary or beautiful or whatever book. Doesn't set out to be those things, but I've never bought any other book for 14 people. So if there's something that, moves you that much, and the vocabulary of it, the ideas in it have just become part of my way of looking at the world. And for those 14 friends, or at least for many of them, it's become a shared kind of reference point. And so we talk about those things when we meet. And so it is very important to me, actually. I mean, that was 4 or maybe even 5 years ago that I was invited to that group. And so I know that it's stayed with me. So
who have you gifted it to? How do you decide which friend gets this book?
Well, one of the people I gifted it to was my sister, and we already know something about my sister, right? We know my sister's quite competitive and extremely high achieving, and I have so much respect for everything she does. And she's a mum, and she's a very busy woman, and she's doing a PhD. And when she opened it at Christmas, she was actually, I think, a little bit offended, and she burst out laughing. She was like, why? You think I need to, exactly what I had said, like, you telling me I need to play bigger than this? And it took her a very long time, I think, to read it. But since she started it, we have now had quite a few, really good conversations as a result of it. And for her, as for me, some of the ideas in it have really, I think, stayed with her as techniques. So yeah, one was for my sister, my mother, my mother-in-law, and then for at least 3 former executive directors of our nonprofit who've all gone on to do other things. 2 of them are on the board now of the nonprofit. And so it's become, I suppose, a shared vocabulary for us in our talking about the nonprofit, and as well as our own role in it and our wider role. And I've also given it to some of those are Kosovars. And I think that Kosovan women have got, a whole other layer of challenge in playing big, because they've got, additional layers of patriarchy and limitations on public belief in what they can do or what's appropriate for them to do. And so I wish it was available in Albanian, and then I would give it to even more. But it's definitely been something that I really want to share with a lot of my Kosovan friends.
How do you think it would affect a Kosovan reader?
Well, one of the things I struggle with the book is actually the fact that it's written for women. So that's in the subtitle, or at least in the in the blurb, that this, and Tara Mohr's work, which one of the nice things about the pandemic has been that I've joined some of her co-working sessions, and I've joined one of her kind of live interview chats. And so I don't think she was doing those things for free before the pandemic. And so I've been able to do that over the last few months. And so I know that for her, it's a very important thing. And she often says things like, as women, and then she goes on. And I slightly resist that, because I think so many of the things she talks about are not unique to women. And there are plenty of men who could benefit from those techniques. And I think the 2 questions can be kept separate. The one is, what are the issues in our society that hold women back? But then there are the things about, what do human beings say to themselves or do to themselves that limit what they can do? And so, but I think that Kosovars would find it easier to see the world through that gender lens than perhaps I do, because it is still a relatively a highly gender segregated society. And in fact, for the communities that I work with in our nonprofit, even more segregated. It's often the case that poorer people have even more rigid patriarchies and definitions of what's allowed and what's appropriate.
Mm-hmm. How did it did it change your work life or your personal life? Did you read this book and decide to play bigger somewhere else?
Yeah. So, I mean, that was the first, I suppose that was the thing that made me read on, was this leap chapter, which, so just to summarize for people who haven't read the book, the idea of Tara's idea of a leap is that, when you've got a dream or something you want to do, we spend a lot of time, and she says that we as women, and I think this is certainly one of the features that is more common in women than men, of kind of getting ourselves really well prepared before we make that change. So typically the examples she gives are always about going on a course, or making sure you're properly qualified for it, or making sure you've got a few years of experience before you make a suggestion in a company, or change the way that things are done around here, and that we will take really baby steps to and get feedback to confirm that we're on the right track before we make a change. Mm-hmm. And the challenge she gives in the book is that is for you to make a leap that is not baby steps, and does not require you to be well qualified, but it just requires you just to do it. And I was asked to speak about that because of the work that I'd done, in fact, with that family that I mentioned, having met the little boy who had the terrible burns. His 9-year-old sister was not in school. And when I discovered that, and I said, why not? And I'm sure we can get you to school. She told me that the school had said she was too late to go to school ever. And I thought she must have misunderstood, because clearly Kosovo and every country guarantees the rights of children to education at the age of 9 and well beyond. But actually it turned out that after I'd gone to speak to the school director and then gone to the ministry, that in fact she was right, that the Kosovan system was said that if you weren't registered for school by the age of 9, then you were too late and you were, quote, too hard to teach, and that that was the end of her chances of education, which made me really mad. And so the next day I said to her that, okay, I would teach her and help her to get ready to go to school. They'd said that if she could pass a test, then they would allow her into school. So I said, okay, I'll teach you and get you into school. And she then replied, well, can my friends come? And I was like, oh, how many friends? And it turned out, that it was not just one girl. This was a whole community of kids. We started off going round her neighbors' houses, and in one afternoon we visited 18 houses, and in 18 houses there were 21 children who were in her situation, who wanted to go to school but had been told they were too late. And so that was my leap, was not being able to sleep that night, and then the next day saying to Rob, my partner, what if I were to have a go at teaching all of these kids, which is suddenly a very different proposition, and was full of fear, and the fear of failure, and whether it was the right thing to do and whatever. But it was one of those situations, I sometimes say it's like being a doctor at the scene of a car crash. There was a moral obligation, and that I had the skills, and there was no good reason not to do it. And so that was my leap, because it happened so quickly, and in some ways it was a stupid thing to do, and I was terribly unprepared for it. Like, I had no idea how much it would cost. And when I looked back at the end of the 6 months that I set myself a 6-month target, that I would try it for 6 months, and if I'd failed by the end of that, I would give up. And we had a little fundraising event to raise money for to rent a place that we could do these lessons. And I kind of thought, and for some pencils, that was the extent of my budgeting. And I think we raised €900, that's about $900, which was a really nice amount to raise from a fundraising event. But when we actually came to add up at the end of that 6 months how much it had cost $8,000. Now, if anyone had told me at that day that it was going to be $8,000, I just wouldn't have ever tried. And thankfully, that 8,000 and more was provided by people who saw what we were doing. And, I blogged about it, and we did lots of media work, and we got enough people contributing one way or another. But anyway, as I say, I was hideously unprepared. So that was my leap. But I was reading all of that. This was a few years on, and that's what I had been told to come and talk about. And I was like, well, what am I going to say about my leap now? I don't, at that time I was feeling so snowed under. I was writing the books. I was trying to also run this non-profit one way or another, I don't have time to make a leap. And I was on a bus, of course, as I was listening to the book. And I remember literally turning the audio off and kind of trying to work out what I could say about what my, how I could be authentic and share kind of where I was without really, I didn't want to minimize the value of this, but I didn't, I felt like going in and saying, I'm playing big enough, thank you. What I really need is a book on playing small right now and to make my life feel more manageable. And then there was just this little voice in my head that was like, well, what you really want to do is more writing. And, you are not carving out enough time for the writing. So maybe, that's the leap. And so I went home and wrote an email to the board of our nonprofit and to the staff and said, I've realized I want to have 2 days a week when I can really be focused on my writing and not do emails to do with our nonprofit. And that's what I love. And that also means that I can pay my way in our, in our family economy. And so this is, a fair and reasonable thing to ask. And not that anybody was saying no, but to myself, I needed to kind of make that case. And so that turned out to be my leap. It was, in a way it was doing more, but it was doing less as well. It was saying no to all of that stuff that had been crowding out my writing, which is the thing that is my passion.
I love that you mentioned your night of staying up all night thinking about it, and that those moments of fears right before these leaps, because as I told you in our initial emails, I've read this book a couple times and something different jumps out at me each time I've read it. And the chapter that really, really got to me this time around was the chapter on fear. And she makes a distinction between, and I hope I say this word right, Pakad, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Pakad being the irrational fear about what might happen, which is sort of my specialty. I don't want to brag, but I'm really good at that. But then there's a different kind of fear that she designates called yira, which is an excitement we feel inhabiting a bigger space than we are used to. And that struck me as such incredible wisdom, that to be able to designate between those two fears. And when you do lean into the yira, it's not really fear. It's more, she calls it actually a sacred space.
When I started my webinars that I run a monthly webinar on storytelling for nonprofits. And the first time I did that, I was really, really scared. Like I was, again, awake all night, but with a different kind of fear maybe. And I was, it felt very public, and it felt like, there was all the technicalities of making sure that the webinar bit ran well, and that, I didn't get Zoom bombed and all of these, other things I was obsessing about. And one of the friends that I'd given the book to, sent me a message on Facebook, said, how are you feeling about this afternoon? And I was like terrified. And she said, this is Yira, right? And it helped so much to have her saying that, because then, as you say, you can lean into it and you can feel, hey, I'm about to walk into a sacred space. This is what an exciting thing to be on the brink of. So.
And you never regret that, is the other thing that I've noticed on the times when I have walked into experiences that I think are scary, or I am not qualified enough for, or I'm not, I haven't achieved enough to try this yet, and I walk in anyway. I have never regretted it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you reread this book?
Funnily enough, so when I started this consultancy about a year ago, and I was setting out so this is my new thing I want to do. I started a document called Elizabeth 3.0. This is the relaunch, and I kind of listed all the things I needed to do, and one of them was listen again to Playing Big. And I haven't listened to all the way through, but I have chosen particular chapters, including there's one on unhooking from praise, which I was really struggling with. I think the more that you do stuff on your own, if you're running your own business or you're out of a system where anyone's going to give you a gold star. And so I realized how I needed that one. So I've kind of dipped in and listened to particular bits that have, I knew would resonate again.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a particularly important chapter for writers, because a lot of times we rely so much on reviews, and her advice to take feedback simply as a data point was what I had always seized on before this fear chapter really got to me this time around. But that's why I've always, the parts of the book that I've underlined and gone back to many times, is that unhooking from both the criticism and the praise, and just doing the work for the sake of the work, is so empowering.
Yeah. And I've started this maybe 2 years ago now. I've started this nightly ritual of saying 3 things that I'm proud of myself for, because I realized that I can give myself the gold stars. And so now I have this, and I even write them down. So I have a little spreadsheet where they're recorded, for whatever, the great gold star giver, if they ever need it, it's there.
Oh, I love that. So do you even do it on a really bad day? Will you even do things like, I flossed my teeth?
Yeah, sometimes you have to dig quite deep. It's true.
But you still do it. You will always find 3 things.
Yeah,
I love that so much.
It's become very important to me. Is all the more on the bad days, because on the good days you've got other people saying well done, or giving you the gold.
Will you tell me what you're reading right now? Are you in the middle of anything?
So I'm reading a book about music in the Balkans, which is a kind of technical book. Most of the underlining I'm doing there is of new vocabulary like epigonism and pneumatic, and words that are probably I'm not going to use again. So that's my non-fiction book. And then I'm reading, my trashy fiction is always Jack Reacher. So the Lee Child was my real guilty pleasure. So, and then in Albanian, I'm reading a book which I was given by the author, which is set in a prison. I was doing some work in prisons in Albania, and so I was given this book as something that might be interesting for me. So that's my Albanian book. And I have a book of, in fact, also a book of Albanian poetry. So that's my poetry book. So yeah, I've got a selection.
You're all over the place.
Yeah, it's a bit all over the place.
I love it. Elizabeth, this has been so wonderful talking to you. You inspire me so much. Will you tell our listeners where they can find you online?
So I'm in, I guess, all the usual places. So on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram even, and LinkedIn. And then I have my website, elizabethgowing.com, where people can find my books, and also they can sign up for my if they're interested in the training on telling your story, then they can sign up there to be told about the upcoming webinars. And then I've just started a podcast. So together with Rob, my partner, our podcast is called A Coffee in the Accursed Mountains. So the Accursed Mountains are the mountains between Kosovo and Albania. So it's a podcast sharing stories of people's lives and culture living in Kosovo and Albania. So they can find us there wherever they get their podcasts.
On my deep dive yesterday, that was one of the things I read, is the function of a coffee in Kosovo, and how that is such an important part of life, to sit with one coffee and talk for hours and watch for hours.
Yeah, no, it's another thing I've learned, although I still don't really drink coffee. But in fact, our first episode of the podcast is about mountain tea, which is another great Albanian tradition, which is a kind of herbal tea. And that's my alternative to coffee. But the sitting, nursing it, and having a hot drink with somebody to seal a deal, or to kind of make any kind of commitment is still really important.
What is mountain tea? What's it made of?
Well, you see, there's a very interesting question, because it turns out there are 2 kinds of mountain tea, both called mountain tea. And the one that you drink gives a very good clue as to where you're from, whether you're from the south of Albania or from the north of Albania or Kosovo, there's quite a distinction between those groups of people, and possibly their outlooks, and even physically you can quite often tell if somebody's a northerner or a southerner. And the tea from the south is plant called sideritis, which is, it's got little yellow flowers, and I've never heard of it anywhere else, but it's drunk in Greece and Albania as mountain tea. And then what's used for mountain tea in the north or in Kosovo is marjoram, or oregano, you'd call it. And so that's very common, but not very commonly drunk as tea. So it's delicious. I would recommend it.
Do you put anything in it?
No, so you just steep it in water, and then sometimes people put honey or sugar in it, but I just drink it as it is, and it's a really lovely drink.
It sounds so good. It never would have occurred to me to use marjoram as a tea.
I actually found it in a health food shop in Britain, mixed with something else, I can't remember what, and packaged as a skin purity tea. And apparently it's very good for your skin.
Oh, the tea sounds lovely. I'm going to try that. Well, thank you. This has been so wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me.
Welcome to the Patreon exclusive clip for the Best Book Ever podcast. I'm Julie Strauss, and this is where I get a chance to talk to my guests about something completely random and sometimes totally ridiculous. Today, my guest is Elizabeth Gowing, who appeared on my show this week to talk about Playing Big by Tara Mohr. Let's get to it. From reading about your life online and learning about what you do, in my head, I imagine that you have a fairly minimalist lifestyle in terms of possessions, particularly when you were traveling between the three countries. Now you're traveling between the two. Is that accurate in terms of what you can buy and consume?
That's a really interesting question, because I also I'm tempted to turn my computer on so you can see my room, but I'm not sure I'm brave enough to. So I would also have said that was, so it was true of me and partly dictated by my life, and also something that I aspire to. So for the last 3 years, for example, I have been trying to lose one item from my house every day. So if you think about that, that's about 1,000 items that I have lost without really noticing. So, I mean, that suggests also that there was work to be done. But I have really been working on it, and I have been really, I would say I'm not somebody who needs items around me. I don't spend money on stuff. And along with trying to lose things from my house, I was trying to cut what I bought. So I just made a list of everything. Every time I bought something that wasn't consumable, I added it to my list, just as a kind of to note it, and as a little way of nudging myself. And so I've even seen in those 3 years how I've really reduced all kinds of purchases. So when it came to doing this move from Albania, I thought that this was going to be really easy because I had such a pared down lifestyle. And then, you know what it's like, I guess, when everyone moves house, you discover those little boxes of stuff. And even though I threw away loads and I sold loads and I donated loads to, families in need and whatever, there was still kind of this, I feel this revulsion and quite a deep sense of disappointment in myself. So yes, I would say I aspire to minimalism, but I have definitely not got there yet.
Well, so that said, I know that you are a reader. And so my curiosity then is always about your bookshelf. So tell me, how do books earn a place on your bookshelf?
Well, we went to Jordan 3 years ago to visit some American friends of ours who had been in foreign service they're slightly older than us, and they'd been in foreign service for their whole career. And we knew they were big readers. And we looked at their bookshelf in Jordan, and there was hardly any books on it. I mean, like maybe 10 books on there. And I said, where are all your books? Like what? And they said, we just decided some years ago that when we finished a book, our first thought was going to be, who were we going to pass this on to? And that would be part of our process of reading a book. And I found that so wise and so helpful. And I have done that ever since. So as part of my losing something from the house every day, I've always, with every book I've finished, I've thought, like, who can I move this on to? And it's been lovely because it's, as well as meaning that my shelves are less cluttered, I've got back in touch with old friends or with people, who I remembered having a conversation with about this thing from some years ago, but maybe I didn't know them that well, and have just sent them an email and said, can I put this in the post to you? And it's really added to the richness of reading those books. So I guess it's a kind of personal book crossing.
Right. So does anything stay?
I very rarely reread books, which makes, again, Tara Mohr's book all the more special, because the fact that I have gone back to it. But so it's not that I keep books because I'll reread them, but I suppose I keep them if I feel like I might want to either refer to them or refer somebody else to them. I might want to have them to share. But also if they've been inscribed to me by, somebody special, or especially if they're by the author, which increasingly now I feel very lucky that I've been given lots of books by author friends, or friends who've become authors, or authors who've become friends. So I guess the ones that I have kept are ones that I couldn't bear to lose that inscription from as much as the actual book. My partner, Rob, he writes historical thrillers. So of course my copies of his are on the bookshelf. But yeah, I'm trying to be ruthless even about what I put on my shelves, but at least I'm good. I'm good going forward. It's just now going back to the books pre the beginning of that new policy.
Well, I love that idea, and I'm not one who gets rid of books, but gosh, I love your idea of thinking of the person as making that part of your reading process. That is absolutely magical, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm a diehard maximalist when it comes to books, not about most other things, but books and plants. I tend to hoard both of those things.
If you're going to be a hoarder, those are very virtuous ways to hoard.
This is what I keep telling myself. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this extra time with Elizabeth. Make sure you find her on her website, elizabethgowing.com, and look for her books at your favorite bookstore. Remember, my patrons get this extra interview time every week. So if you enjoyed this sneak peek, please join us over on Patreon. patreon.com/bestbookever. In addition to extra interview time, patrons also get monthly book club menus, curated book selections, and advance notice of all the books we discuss on the podcast. Your patronage helps me out with the expenses of running this podcast, and I am grateful from the bottom of my heart. I hope you'll consider joining us. That's it for this week, bookworms. Drop me a line and let me know what you're reading, and as always, I will see you at the library.